November 16th, 2020, regarding EJAG letter of resignation. Commissioner Laura Bishop, in the light of your recent decision to approve the Line 3 401 water crossings permit, several members of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's MPCA Environmental Justice Advisory Group, EJAG, are submitting our collective and public resignation. After much discussion, we cannot continue to legitimize and provide cover for the MPCA's war on Black and Brown people.
The Line 3 pipeline will cross over 200 bodies of water, inevitably poisoning rivers, wetlands, and wild rice beds. It will emit as many greenhouses as running 50 new coal plants 24 hours a day. If we were to get every other sector in our state to carbon neutral, we wouldn't be able to offset the added emissions that this pipeline will bring. This pipeline threatens further the spread of COVID-19 when we're experiencing peak cases and hospitalizations in our state.
Line 3 will mean violated treaty rights, heightened risk of sexual trafficking and sexual violence, and an insult to the 3 tribal nations that strongly oppose its construction. Any perceived economic benefits are extremely short-term. When Michigan's governor is canceling Enbridge's Line 5 and oil and gas prices are dropping while the cost of carbon emissions is quickly rising, it is obvious that Line 3 is a poor economic choice for Minnesota's working and middle classes.
The decision to approve the permit sends a clear message that the Walz administration and the MPCA hold no regard for the well-being of Minnesotans or our relatives around the world who depend on us to dramatically, rapidly, and justly transition our economies away from fossil fuels.
This is the final straw after increasing disappointment in the MPCA's failure to build on the hard work of dedicated EJAG members over the years. The transition to a new commissioner has set back the EJAG's work, and the EJAG has since been excluded from important decisions that affect how the group is managed. EJAG members are not consulted on the hiring of an outside facilitator, nor on the divvying up of group members into group works. EJAG members have also experienced dismissal, being discouraged from sharing honest thoughts and opinions. This is not how an advisory group should be engaged to appropriately respect the wisdom being sought.
When discussing the Line 3 decision, Commissioner Bishop told an EJAG member to not make something personal, when Line 3 is personal in every way imaginable. How can precious water, indigenous dignity, and children's futures not be personal? We are disappointed in the failure to honor the time that we all contribute. While we have seen small actions taken internally to improve understanding, measurements, and culture in the agency, our communities demand action, and this agency cannot claim to promote justice without results that improve our lives.
We demand that Commissioner Bishop and the Walz administration reflect on the choices that were made. Your decision to side with a Canadian corporation over your own people is reprehensible and devastating. We ask that you do everything in your power to repair the damage you have done and seek a healing path to justice with the communities you have harmed. Signed in unity, Maryan, Abdinur, Erica Chung, Anita Irvina Davis, Leah Fouché, Charles Frempong Longdon, Danya Martin Gavilan, Saria Goodspeed, Magdalena Kaluza, Winona LaDuke, Zeke McKinney, Shirley Nordham, Kaylee Swift.
I'ma work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it, work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. We have some breaking news today, a really important development in the struggle against the Line 3 tar sands pipeline. Recently, the Minneapolis Pollution Control Agency and the Walz administration approved a permit to begin construction on this toxic Line 3 project. And in response to that approval, we've had 12 members of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Environmental Justice Advisory Group submit a collective resignation. This is a really public, powerful resignation of community leaders who were serving on this committee in response to the Line 3 approval And we are fortunate enough today to be joined by 3 of those members who submitted their resignation. Really appreciate you all joining us, and really excited to hear more about what led to this decision. I think it's a really crucial process for people to get involved in. So can we start just by introducing yourself to our listeners? Who are you, and how did you become involved in this environmental justice advisory group?
Yeah, I can go first. My name's Kaleigh. I sort of came to the advisory group in a little bit of a roundabout way. I interned at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency during my last semester of college at the University of Minnesota, and have always or sort of developed a passion for environmental justice in college, and originally joined the group because I had a lot of respect for the people who were on the advisory group and felt that their voice was really important in pushing the leadership of the MPCA a little bit further. And sort of as I spent time with them as an intern, just like really like that respect only deepened. So when spots opened up after I had graduated and after I'd ended my internship with them, I decided to apply, and I was able to make it on. So
cool. Thanks for joining us, Kaleigh. Kaleigh's actually a return guest.
Good to be here again.
Hell yeah.
My name is Maryan Abdinur. I came to be on the EJAG advisory group in 2016. I was one of the original members. And prior to that, I was also the intern for the Environmental Justice Department in 2015, at the time when the fight for or fight against the Northern Metals was happening. The Clean Air Act was just released, the Life and Breath report. And so it was in the midst of a lot of like evaluating Minnesota's environmental climate and what does that look like? What are the health or the levels of soil, air, and water? And then how does that correlate with people? And then the disparities in communities of color. And I remember during my internship, I did a lot of engagement and kind of forced my way into some projects that I necessarily was not supposed to be a part of, primarily because as a longtime interpreter, I was not finding an adequate language for my communities and the people that looked like me. I'd go through websites and report back that, or pages and pages of website, that the language was not working. How this was being communicated is people are not going to understand. And how can you just say you are, letting people know these disparities and just putting an article on your website that is not significant, like that does not cover the needs and how to communicate with the community. And so I did a lot of open streets events and door knocking in order to get some of the words out, especially around the Northern Metals and what were the decisions that were being made around that, and then the Clean Air Act and what could that mean for people. And then also advocated for the advisory committee to be created with, at that time, with Commissioner Stein and then the staff at the Department of Environmental Justice. And when it was created, I was invited to apply, and then the group was selected. And it was a wonderful, some of the most powerful people and voices and just, experts in community engagement, and to be able to work with them and to learn alongside them, and then to dig in deeper into some of the principles as an institution that this agency was utilizing. And then I was really motivated by involving language of equity, and then breaking down the levels of equity that this agency needed to consider, especially when talking about environmental justice.
Hell yeah. Thanks for joining us, Maryan. And I've had the pleasure of building with Maryan around urban agriculture and food justice. We talk about Northeast Minneapolis and the relationship between Northern Metals and the GAF shingles factory. And Maryan, is a Central Ave comrade, and we also organized our workplace together. So thanks for joining us today, Maryan.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Hell yeah. We got one more distinguished guest today.
Hi, my name is Magdalena and Kaluza. I use they, them pronouns. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. And I joined the EJAG recently, last fall, I guess, or maybe, I applied in August of 2019. And I applied because my friend and sort of like a comrade in community, Jose Luis, reached out to me and encouraged me to apply. He is staff at the MPCA and helped to convene the group's meetings. And I grew up in Phillips. I grew up between Phillips, the central neighborhood, and then a little bit in Guatemala. And all three places are overly burdened by pollution and by environmental racism. And Jose Luis also lives in Phillips. And so we have connected around biking, around community gardening. And I have been involved in environmental education, especially with youth work, since I was a teenager. And so for me, this was, okay, here's a space where maybe I can take a little more risks. I can invite others to take more risks with me and share some of the stories from my environmental education and community work. But like I said, I was pretty new to the group. And with the pandemic coming, we quickly went online.
Yeah.
We can talk more about later.
Hell yeah. Well, Magdalena also is a longtime friend and comrade of mine, organizer, cultural worker, and just a really bright spirit. So I wanted to say again, I felt really lucky to look at that list of folks who made this brave decision to resign and realize I had some relationships. And I really appreciate you all being willing to come on the show and share some of this knowledge with our listeners. If I could just quick kind of do a summary of what I heard or what I understand is that this environmental justice advisory group was created from community organizing in communities of color and working class communities that wanted to have a greater say in how the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency conducted its business and fight for things like clean soil, clean air, clean water, address some of the environmental racism, environmental injustices that have been done in oppressed communities. And this advisory body has been coming together for years now to help shift the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in that direction. Is that like a decent summary of the work?
Yes. I would agree that is the basis of it, and a way for us to advocate from internally. What does it look like to organize internally within an institution that holds such a powerful position? Because the permitting process and allowing for facilities to continue to produce the level of greenhouse gases that they're doing is so dependent on this agency. And we, in most of its history, like for example, the agency have had environmental justice platform or framework for 20 years, but it wasn't really activated until 2014 when they started working on redeveloping the framework and then started rolling it out in 2015. But it's still only one department. Environmental justice should be in everybody's job description and across the institution, and it should not just remain with two people. Currently, there's two people that do the work, and they're the ones that are expected to push when they previously, before, as Magdalena talked about, Jose Luis, I did not feel like the people that were there had the necessary tools to even do an environmental justice framework. That they were passionate about it and they were there. However, there was still more work to do because the whole organization was not in tow. And so how do you push an organization that should have been doing this work for years to even consider just like a sliver of it, or give it, two people assigned to it in a framework, and then, we can go to sleep. So.
Yeah.
Two staff of hundreds, just to be clear.
And what type of you talked about it a bit, but like what type of work does the MPCA do? What type of decisions is it involved in? These hundreds of staff who are working at the MPCA who aren't looking through an environmental justice framework, what do they do?
So the MPCA is a regulatory body of the Minnesota government, the state government. And so a lot of their work is around permitting. It's around permitting facilities. It's also around doing analysis of air, water, and soil qualities across the state. They do work around remediation of polluted sites. And so it is a really large agency. I think last time I heard there was over 800 employees in the agency. And as Maryan said, there's 2 who are assigned to environmental justice work. And beyond that, just like this might be a little bit in the weeds, but it wasn't until this administration under Laura Bishop that the environmental justice team at the MPCA was positioned, rather than like buried within a different department, was positioned directly under the commissioner. So previously, when I was interning there and before I joined the group, they were positioned within one of the largest departments at the MPCA, sort of under a very strange chain of command of people who had nothing to do with environmental justice and whose primary work duties had nothing to do with environmental justice. And they essentially had to go up this chain of command to attempt to try to do any work around environmental justice. But yeah, the MPCA is also like primarily made up of people who are like engineers, people who come out of the hard sciences, whose understanding of things like environmental racism and or racism more broadly, quite frankly, is extremely limited. It's, not a very diverse workforce. There are, more young people and more people of color that are coming onto the workforce there, but the people who are in positions of power are overwhelmingly white and male at the MPCA. And internally, too, I would also like to say, like, the MPCA has an environmental justice steering team that, for most of my experience with them, was also primarily white and male, and made up of like the mid-level and upper-level management folks at the agency, who were the ones that sort of had the power to make sure that environmental justice was getting instituted and were not. So.
Yeah, I don't want to make too broad of characterizations, and I'm sure just like in any institution, you have people who joined that work from a real passion and quest for justice or like good relations with the planet. But I think you could kind of characterize regulatory bodies in our capitalist system in general as being pretty cozy with industry, and a lot of times being a revolving door between the private industries that they're intended to regulate and the regulatory bodies. So that's how you have situations where Northern Metals can exist, where the GAF can exist, where we have these areas of toxicity and environmental racism, and you all are a part of then trying to push that work forward and actually put some teeth and some power into these regulatory bodies so that we're not just at the will of these corporations. I wanted to maybe address this question initially to Magdalena, and then definitely Maryan and Kaleigh if you want to jump in. But Magda, could you kind of give us a rundown on what Line 3 is? So we talked about the MPCA, and they had a big decision lately around the Line 3 pipeline project. I bet you most of our listeners have probably heard of Line 3, but I find myself learning more and more about it every time I dig into it. So could you kind of talk to us about who's building Line 3, who will it benefit, who will it harm, and how will it harm them? Like, give us a synopsis of this project.
Yeah, Line 3 is a tar sands pipeline. It's owned and run by Enbridge, which is a Canadian corporation, to transport basically dirty oil, the dirtiest of the oils, to Superior, Wisconsin, going straight through northern Minnesota. And it is going to benefit basically Enbridge, right? It's going to benefit, but for a very small amount of time, because we know tar sands is not a kind of oil that is going to, it's not economically sound, let's put it that way. And it's going to hurt our state, and it's going to hurt the lives of humans and of plants and of animals. Everyone is, I can't say everyone, I guess folks think that there is economic reason to build the pipeline because it will provide jobs. But the thing is, it's going to provide jobs for a very short amount of time, while poisoning water. And it's going to emit more greenhouse gases than we could ever hope to cancel out. And so it's a critical mistake for our state. And it's not going to have any benefits for our local communities. And it's going to harm especially indigenous communities who have already received so much systemic and state violence.
Yeah. I heard one I think it might be included in the resignation letter, and I think, Magda, you maybe shared this stat with me, or not this stat, but this framework, but it basically said that if we could zero out the rest of our economy to carbon neutral, that this tar sand pipeline would replace all of that harm. Like if you build the tar sands pipeline, you could still take all the rest of the carbon out of our economic activity, and we still then wouldn't make a dent in the amount of carbon released into the atmosphere. And that just like really blew my mind, like how toxic this is. I didn't know if Kaleigh or Maryan, you wanted to add anything about the project in general.
Yeah, like another quick thing to put things in perspective too, that last stat also really stuck with me. And also I've also heard it would emit the greenhouse gases of over 50 coal plants. Essentially, it would be like building 50 coal plants. Yeah, it's a very frustrating project. And listening to the indigenous members of the MPCA EJAG speak about this has been quite frankly heartbreaking for the entirety of my interaction with them, even before I was on the EJAG myself. And I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about this. But yeah, again, primarily Canadian corporations. So the money that's going to be extracted, the wealth that's going to be extracted from this pipeline isn't even going into a Minnesotan economy, let alone even like a economy in the United States. It's not going into the communities here. There will be small boosts because the workers will be paid for a lot of money for a very short amount of time. However, what I've also heard is that the Enbridge in particular, like uses a lot of workers who are not from local communities. So it's not even like the people are benefiting locally for they're, importing a lot of their workforce from elsewhere. And so, yeah, again, very, very low benefits, very, very high harms. Lots of damage is going to be done. The risk is very high. I can't remember what the exact number is, but I think I heard over several hundred watersheds potentially being damaged as a result of this pipeline being built. I could be wrong about that, but lots of watersheds. And when we think about like indigenous cultural practices that revolve so heavily around water, in northern Minnesota, the cultivation of wild rice being a really key part of that, fishing, things like that, like essentially their entire livelihoods, their entire cultural connection to the land is being threatened right now, the land and the water. And and as Magdalena like briefly touched on, in the middle of a moment that is like unprecedented harm already happening to indigenous communities. If you think about like the coronavirus pandemic. So yeah, it's an extremely frustrating project. It's been like really disgusting and heart-wrenching to sort of, be hearing about this. And there has been nothing but frustration expressed from the EJAG around this project for several years now. So
I think we've been pushing and expressing that frustration and heartbreak since 2016, when this project came on the spotlight, and the MPCA had 4 years to evaluate that. And everything that has been said to add to that is there are 4 indigenous nations that are like 4 communities that this is going to go through and influence their food and water supply. And then not even to think about the soil and air as well. And in that, a very similar project on the other side of the border, or on the other side of the eastern border in Michigan, was denied permitting by the Michigan governor, and I forget what they're called. It's not called the Michigan Pollution Control Agency, but they're a similar organization that also is in there. And to think about that, the fact that Michigan and Minnesota are both in the regional overall environmental agency that is the EPA, a part of the EPA. We're in the same region with Michigan, and how do you balance that? How do you watch your neighboring state to say, no, this is not beneficial to our state because it has these really strong, harmful to our communities at so many levels? It's beyond water and air, it's the everyday life. And how do you influence that? What does that bring? And what does it mean for vulnerable communities, especially when you have some of the poorest counties in the midst of a global pandemic, that this giant project that's happening? And granted that this pipeline has been there, but this corporation has been taking most of like thousands of barrels of oil away from it, and they have not utilized it for such a long time that they don't really have a use for it. And the idea to re-permit it instead of remediating that space and taking out whatever that's right now on the ground, for the MPCA to just so casually say, you know, I'm sorry that you're disappointed, but I'm going to make this decision based off of nothing at this point, and that ignore their clearly mission stated of what the MPCA's mission is: protect and improve the environment and human health of Minnesotans. And it does not align in any way. It does not align with an environmental justice platform. It does not align with the mission. It does not align with Minnesotans across the state. And so it's really deep, and it's really layered. And it's, I find a lot of dismissal and a lot of like disconnect from the person when it's so personal and it's so us. And how do you make a decision like that and then say, I'm sorry that you're disappointed? Like, we're beyond disappointed.
Yeah.
So I think, there's.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
Can I just add one layer of?
Please do.
I mean, we've mentioned so many of the layers of harm, right? There's the pollution, the greenhouse gas emissions. There's the harming the water. There is the devastating impacts of bringing people in during this pandemic, but then the breaking of treaties. But then also there's folks who are up north have seen cars with out-of-state license plates. They've been seeing out-of-staters walking around without masks on, wearing shirts that say, I built Keystone XL. I mean, it's clear that there is a huge influx of labor, as Kaleigh said, from other states. And we know that there's been research that when you have that type of influx of sort of high cash labor for a short amount of time from other places, sexual trafficking and sexual violence increases. And so in a state where we already see so many missing and murdered Indigenous siblings, relatives, for that to be happening is just one more level of harm that our communities are going to have to fight against. Yeah,
it's just a violent process on every level. It's the way it impacts the earth, the way it impacts all living creatures, the way it impacts the local economies. I wanted to just say one thing out loud, because I realize I hear it and I start to normalize it or make an abstraction. We hear the word tar sand, and like Magdalena said, tar sands oil is oil that is not like a deep well of petroleum that's easy to tap into. It's like this mindscape where they're pulling the dirtiest and most toxic oil that's hardest to refine out of these huge, massive mine projects in Canada that are some of like the most, they're like hellscapes, like absolutely destroy these areas to get to this really, really toxic, really expensive tar sands oil, to then try to repurpose this pipeline for this short-term profits. It's hard to communicate the insanity. I wanted to just, you all started to touch on it, but can you talk about like, what was this specific permitting decision? Like, what permit were they making this decision on? And then how did you all come to the collective decision to resign? I'm curious, like, I know it sounds like you all have been fighting against this project for years, but what was this specific permit, and how did this become the moment where you all decided to leave the Environmental Justice Advisory Group?
The permit was the 401 water crossings permit. And so basically it was a water quality or water protection permit. I don't know all the details, but it was the 401 water crossings permit. And the MPCA had 1 year to make a decision on that specific permit. And the deadline was November 14th. And they could either deny the permit, which is what we wanted them to do and what so many people have been pressuring them to do. They could approve it, which is what they did, or they could waive it. Waiving it would have sent the decision then to the federal government or the Army Corps of Engineers. And They chose to approve it. And so now I think there's some next permit. I don't know which one it is, but that one is at the federal level. We anticipate it going through. The Trump administration has been rolling back environmental regulation, environmental protection, and has been doing as much extraction as possible.
Yeah.
And so basically this permit was like the MPCA's opportunity to halt. And while maybe it wouldn't be a permanent halt because there would likely be a lawsuit by Enbridge and or the Trump administration against the MPCA at some point, it was at least going to slow the process, right? And it was buy more time. And so they failed to buy more time. And now construction, there's already pre-construction happening. And I think Enbridge says construction could start by the end of November.
Ugh.
And it's really difficult to roll back from that, right? Once they have okayed that permit, if it was a pause or a no, there is a way for us to work through it. So it just blocks our whole state and our whole community from having much of an ability of doing anything, right? And that's what the really deep disappointing component of it is, you have choices. The MPCA has the power to say no to permits, and it very, very rarely, just a very small amount of percentage in its history and currently will say no to a permit, right? Where it generates this idea that, and I think it also is involved in practices that institutions like that, whether it's Enbridge or it's another facility that is polluting our communities, that they are the customers and that individual lives and our populations are considered last. And that is drastically different for communities of color across the state, as it is across the country for who's influenced by environmental injustices.
So how did the resignation come about? Obviously, you all are organizing and advocating around this decision, around the permitting process. I'm curious if you can share. If you can't, I understand that too. Sometimes strategically, it's not the right time. But what were the conversations you were having with each other, and how did it go to the point where no, we have to make this public stand, and we can't stand by and watch this happen?
Yeah, I think I don't feel like I can't talk about it. It's a decision that I made, and I just happened to be able to make that decision in a very collective way with the group of people that I've been working with and hoping to build and work on this together for the last 4 years. For me, it's been the buildup since the transition from the previous commissioner to the new commissioner, from Stein to Bishop. There's been a removal of the connection that we've had with the commissioner and how we worked previously. Although it was at the base of the mountain before we could even climb, and wondering how can we climb this mountain and get to its nooks and crannies, we were at least engaging with the commissioner daily. Any new projects that were coming through, whether it was permitting, whether it was waste management, we were aware of it and getting regular updates. We went from, of course, this component is influenced highly by COVID, but we went from meeting, 6 to 8 hours at a time every other month to these 2-hour meetings online, to where we sit around and we're just getting updates, but really our thoughts and our expertise are not invited to the table to influence decision making or to even give a proper feedback. Things just started to move very fast. And I understand the new commissioner, we might not have a relationship with her in building that, but I think there's a lot of space to pause and create that getting to know each other and that involvement, and to feeling some of that disappointment, and then having a facilitator selected for us without really our opinion, and then being placed in specific committees without our okay and our consent was really hard, because that's not how we've set up the framework. We had the opportunity when we, as the original members, when we started to set up the framework of how we want to conduct our meetings, we specifically chose to have a facilitator. So each one of us has space to be able to say what we need to say when we are meeting. And then most of the rules around what we want with our meeting, because some of the things that we say can also influence legislative. And so we have created that space, but that was not listened to. And I think watching and seeing that a process that we've been a part of since at the beginning with this permitting process for line 3 to be removed from the process and to end up with like either meeting with the commissioner on one-on-one or just our emails and letters sent without having a larger conversation as an advisory group and having the opportunity to advise on it was just the breaking point.
Yeah, no, that definitely resonates with me, Maryan. I will say, things have been tense for many meetings, particularly since COVID started. There's just such a removal of like interpersonal interaction with COVID, and I feel like it honestly also puts a real damper on our ability to like hold people accountable in like an empathetic way, because there's like such this separation between us. And then with what Maryan said about the facilitator too, really also created a lot of like tension. I have been present now for many EJAG meetings, both as a member and then also as an intern. And this has, again, this has been a conversation that's been ongoing for years. This is a conversation that's been frustrating for years for the members of the EJAG. I will say, and I feel comfortable saying this, I technically had resigned prior or at the end of the last meeting prior to the decision that had been made on line 3. And that was as a result of several things. One major part of that was Commissioner Bishop's treatment of the indigenous members on the Environmental Justice Advisory Group and the complete dismissal of their concerns and frustrations, along with a very toxic and quite frankly, violent and very white response to their frustrations, where they were essentially tone policed and told that they cannot be frustrated and that they need to engage in a specific way with the commissioner who has absolutely no respect for them, no respect for their communities, no respect for their work as activists. I saw that, and that was something that was like a breaking point for me. At which point we split off into individual groups. The commissioner, our like subgroups or whatever, and the group that I was in was the group that the commissioner was placed in to do work in. And the group that I was placed in was doing work on reformatting the current framework for environmental justice for the MPCA. Now, there's, a longer standing history of them not asking me what my capacities are or being mindful of my capacities before essentially trying to throw work on my plate. They were arranging meetings with me without asking me my availability and just expecting me to show up. They were trying to have me revise documents without asking me if I had the time or availability to do so. So I get into this group and I express concern at my role as an environmental justice advisory group member on a number of levels. Particularly, one thing that's become very interesting to me over the course of my time with the MPCA is the ways that environmental justice movement work is co-opted by government agencies. And, Jake, we talked a lot about this on the first podcast that I did with you about like sun spaces and moon spaces and like what it means for certain places within institutions to be heat sinks for movement work. And that and, everything that's happened this year and so much went into this decision for me. And so I expressed this frustration. I basically said that like, I'm not sure if I feel comfortable giving you the language to speak about environmental justice when you very clearly have no intention of actually doing anything that's environmentally just and will protect communities that have been harmed by environmental racism. And what I got was a response that was like so frustrating. It was a lot of gaslighting. It was a lot of non-apologies of I'm sorry you feel that way. that I'm sorry that you think this or you think this, rather than being like, no, you're right. Like, we haven't done enough. There was no accountability being taken on the part of the commissioner. And to top it all off, she started crying. And I am very, very triggered by particularly when white women interact with Black people, particularly Black women or Black femme presenting people in the workplace, how white women's tears are weaponized against us and used to devalidate us and used to make themselves the center of attention, used to make themselves the focal point of the conversation, use their tears to garner sympathy, which is definitely what happened. And so that was like, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not, this is not a space for me. Like, this is the violence of white supremacy that's being done by this agency, both on like an institutional level and also on an interpersonal level, is not something that I want to be party to any longer. And I like resigned at the end of that meeting. Well, fast forward like a week and a half, and surprise, surprise, they approved the permit. And basically we got an email from the group, absent our the EJAG staff or the environmental justice staff at the agency, that said, we're thinking about resigning, and is this something that people are interested in doing collectively as a form of action? And yeah, it was an easy decision. I had technically already resigned, and I was like, I'm still signing on to this letter. I fully support you in this action, like, absolutely. And yeah, here to support all of the incredibly powerful people that were on that group, that were wanting to take a stand against the actions of the agency.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think part of my desire to resign too was, let's make as much noise as we can. And Winona used these words of like, I don't want, I think it was like our good name to be used to protect the MPCA, and I felt that way too. Like, if they're going to claim to do environmental justice work, if they're going to claim to listen to their environmental justice advisory group, and then go ahead and make this decision that we have all been opposed to, and people have been opposing since, as Maryan said, for years. Yeah. Like, why would we remain there? And I totally honor and respect those who chose to remain. A few did because they felt that they hoped they could continue to influence the MPCA from the inside out. But I will say that the commissioner, at our last meeting with her before her decision about Line 3, she told us basically her hands were tied. What she said was that if she denied the permit, the decision would go to the federal government, and she knew that they would approve it, and the MPCA, by having denied it, would lose any ability to do some regulating and some protections in allowing the pipeline to go through. And she either was misinformed, although I have information that she was corrected in a meeting prior to that meeting with us. And so potentially she was misleading us on purpose, but that would have happened had she waived it. And we were not asking her to waive the permit. We were asking her to deny the permit. And so to me, it felt like she was not listening to us. She was not heeding the heartfelt, and as Kaleigh said, heartbreaking testimonials that people were giving from on the ground in northern Minnesota. And so it felt like, okay, if we can publicly resign, and if we can get a little bit of media attention around this, hopefully we can get more people aware of Line 3, and we want more people to know that the fight's not over, that this pipeline, maybe it had got the MPCA's permit, it did not get the people's permit, and until it gets past the people, it's not going to be built, and so that's right. I think it was just hopefully a way to get more attention on the topic and make clear that the MPCA is not working with environmental justice in its heart.
Yeah. In this, Commissioner Bishop, are they a appointee by Governor Walz?
A member of the governor's administration, and she comes from corporate. She was Best Buy's corporate responsibility person prior to this.
That makes sense. Yeah. So in that sense, it's also like she was the hit person for the Walz administration, as far as like she was the one that had to throw this punch and push this button. But the onus and the responsibility goes to the whole administration, because Walz appointed somebody from the corporate sector, and they don't make these decisions in a vacuum. They move the agenda of the administration. So it's, it sounds like this person was hostile to you all and took a corporate racist governing tone into the advisory group. And that's all I've seen from Walz administration on every front. You wanted to say something, Maryan?
Yeah, I feel like since, it's not always, it was not roses and rainbows prior to this either, but I feel like since the switch up, anything that we say and we share, whether it's in our feelings, this is personal for us. This is not something that we come to do a job and go to bed. When you're coming in and you are advising somebody who's getting paid hundreds and thousands of dollars, and you're asking them to just do your job, like this is your job, and I'm here to help you do your job in the best possible way, because you're missing a lot of tools, and I'm going to offer that to you for free. While my community is trusting me and saying, yeah, Maryan is here, so we're like, there's somebody speaking on our behalf, even though we don't go in there speaking on everybody's behalf, we're offering our experiences, and the thing that it hits so deeply is because when we're there, we're offering so much of who we are and the histories and the experiences that we come with, and you get this blank face, and you are put aside, oh, that's cute, those are your feelings, you can sit here. Right. Yeah. And when you're speaking about what you experienced on the ground, and then the other component that made it, that to me, this needed to be public, that this resignation needed to be public, was because after okaying the permit and, giving the thumbs up for it, they used the language of saying this was the most rigorous and the most strict because of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee.
Oh man.
And I was like, that's not what we advise. That we did not advise for you to Band-Aid here and a rubber band. No, I need you to say no in order for this to have an ounce of something right within the history of this organization. And no, they did not. And they were able to, they had the audacity to use our name to be able to say, because of them, that we were able to do this.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many parallels, I think, between this and the Upper Harbor Terminal development, and a lot of processes that I've seen where community organizing, pushback, the political power coming from the ground, is responded to by creating a committee. And sometimes these committees can do good work. There's a way that's a terrain that we should organize around, that we could take advantage of. But I really respect you all's decision to resign, because if you don't resign there, that committee loses all the potential for integrity that it has, when they feel like they don't have to listen to you at all, and it really becomes just a showpiece. And that's what happened at the Upper Harbor, is rather than say no to the development in response to the first organizing, this committee was created, and now they're just a rubber stamp, and they're used to justify these really violent decisions, and the fact that you all didn't allow yourself to be used that way, and you made this resignation, I think that's how you play that type of terrain powerfully, because now it puts it back into the sun space of the organizing, and you're not allowing yourselves to be co-opted. I just want to ask a question quick. What's next? You know what I'm saying? Now, from you all's perspective, how do we get involved in the fight to stop Line 3? Magdalena, you said it got the state's permit. It did not get the people's permit. People have been preparing for this fight and engaged in this fight for many years. We saw the Dakota Access Pipeline, one of the largest indigenous-led uprisings, in our time. And this is a really big deal. So what type of organizing do you all see as hopeful and how we should be investing our time fighting Line 3 moving forward?
I can share a couple thoughts. To start, first of all, talk to your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, and your community, so that they know that this is something that is happening. It's happening right now, so that they know what is going on in northern Minnesota. And that they know it can't be built. So we need this to become something that we're all talking about and thinking about. Some of the organizations that you can follow to sort of who are supporting the front lines and kind of putting out calls to action, calls for money, calls for supplies. The GNU Collective, Minnesota 350, Minnesota Environmental Partnership, Honor the Earth, and there are others. But those are some that you can look to if you want to follow on social media or whatever. And then I ask that people, if you have experience doing direct action, share that knowledge. If you don't, learn about direct actions, learn what roles you can and want to play, because there are a whole slew of roles you can play, right? You can take different amounts of risk and use your skills in different ways. And I'd say get a crew together so that you have some people who you maybe have made some agreements with, and how you want to be together if and when you choose to take direct action.
Hell yeah.
No, I agree. I think direct action is going to be a very key part of like ongoing and continued resistance to this pipeline. I just want to be very clear too. We're in such a unique moment, and it feels like there's just so much happening all of the time. And in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings, which are still continuing, I should say, and in the wake of what happened the day after the election here in Minneapolis, where almost 700 protesters were kettled and mass arrested by a multi-agency police force. I just want people to know that like the Walz administration, our Democratic administration, and our Democratic city leadership here in Minneapolis, and more broadly, the coalitions that our law enforcement agencies are forming with one another to enforce militarized polices on us, they will be showing up as well, probably, to Line 3. And I think that the Walz administration has made it very clear that protest is not appreciated, protest is not allowed. And he will continue to approve and justify escalating levels of force against the people who are protesting and taking to the streets, doing direct actions, and which makes what Magdalena is saying really important. Like, we need to protect each other. We need to be prepared. We need to make sure that we're able to keep each other safe as best as we can, learn about different direct action tactics that can help keep us safe. Because this is going to get a lot uglier before it, could even potentially get better. And as Maryan also pointed out earlier, like, this decision with the permit, it really is a very binding decision for the state. This is something that makes going back on this pipeline significantly more difficult, which means that they are going to try to ram this through. And yeah, I think that we should be ready to protest. And it feels very hard to say that in the middle of a global pandemic that is at an all-time, high here in the state. It feels very difficult to say that after months of protesting police brutality and having to be traumatized and re-traumatized every day by state violence. It feels really hard to say that after watching indigenous and Black people be forcibly and violently evicted out of parks. We are dealing with, as a community, as Black people, as indigenous people, as people of color more broadly, like, our communities are dealing with so much right now. And we need to find ways to protect one another, help each other heal, help each other process, so that we can continue this fight. And we can continue to take a stand for ourselves and our communities and our safety. Because, as Maryan said, this is personal. And I'll take it a step further. This is life and death for people. It's always been life and death for people. Indigenous people are dying already. Black people are dying already. And we will continue to die under a Biden administration. We will continue to die under a Walz administration. We will continue to die as pipelines are permitted and police brutality continues. And none of these governments, none of these politicians have any intention of creating a better future for us. And I think that is more clear than anything for me right now. And I apologize. I've radicalized quite a bit over the past year, I have to say, which also influenced a lot of this decision. But it's just, these spaces are not intended to help us. These spaces are intended to, as Jake said, use our voices to put rubber stamps on racist policies, racist actions that will continue to harm us and continue to be violent against us as marginalized people. So
Kaleigh, are you radicalized or are you just learning?
A little bit of both, right? I think a radicalization process is a process of continued learning. You will always learn more. I learn more every single day. I am so thankful to have met all of y'all. Just because like I've learned so much from you all, and I was gonna say a little bit ago, Jake, like what you said about Upper Harbor really rang true with me as well. And like had I not been in the Upper Harbor terminal spaces with you in the capacity that we have been there, like I probably would not have reached the same conclusions on the EJAG. Like this is, you're right that those parallels are there. And I think that resignations are a powerful move and a powerful act of resistance to state and institutional co-optation of our movement spaces. So I want to give a shout out to all of you because you're all incredibly inspiring to me, and you do incredible work, and it feels really it is heartening to know that I'm in the fight with such incredible and powerful people who like have an intention of actually doing things to help their communities, save their communities, keep their communities from facing further violence and continued oppression and death under like what is a violent status quo of white supremacy in this society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think direct action is always our best bet as a community, especially when it's funny because Commissioner Bishop wants to say her hands are tied. It's our hands that she's just tied up, but we're known to break chains. So we'll do what we need to do for us because we protect us and we save us. And we'll continue to doing the work that we're doing in spite of that because we have done it. One of the things that amazes me is we've been in this fight for 600 years and more, right? Since colonialism. So we know what to do. We know how to take care of each other. We know how to get through to the next step. We know how to create a path from the deepest of the deep. And we'll continue to do that. We will continue to protect each other. We'll continue to honor our indigenous communities and our native lands and understand that these people are this land's descendants, that it's connected. And to me, that is deep in the same way that across the world that, where my home is, the environmental influences that are happening in East Africa are a result of these factories that are here. The islands that are being overtaken by seawater are a result of what the choices that we make today here are, right? Whether Commissioner Bishop can say her hands are tied and she can't, but the decision that she makes influences across the world. And that's on her. She can make those decisions and it's on her, but we will continue to do what we need to do to protect each other across the world and here in Minnesota as well. And so, yes, direct action, continue to learn about what all the pipelines are, but what is Line 3, what is happening in northern Minnesota, what's happening in northern Minnesota in the midst of COVID, what is happening in our indigenous communities, and how are continuously their rights being taken and disrespected. And support in any way that you can, whether it's educating your neighbor, safely, and your family members and your community and your kids. They should know about this, but they should know about it in a way that's appropriate to them so they understand and grow up to be responsible adults. Pay attention to the MPCA. What are the permits? There are smaller permits that they're giving up or they're giving away and saying okay to and viewing institutions as the customers. And we, in a capitalistic society, the customer is always right and the customer gets what they need in spite of people and their well-being and their communities, in spite of our plants and in spite of our wonderful ecosystems that we need in order to remain healthy. Pay attention to them, put pressure on them, hold them accountable. Look up on their website, hold them accountable to that bloody mission that they have that they're not following. And so I think continue to do that and stay within your community, understand what your community needs and help each other prepare for whatever it takes. You're so right, Kaleigh, that this administration has a fast response to, walking around this summer in Minneapolis and being in the gardens and seeing tanks. I was like, these cars feel like tanks to me. I come from a civil war, so this is like an immediate reaction to seeing those military uniforms, those guns, patrolling our communities because we're saying no to police brutality. And the answer is, let me give you a larger brutality that is patrolling your streets at night. And so I think, just understand, be real with the reality. These administrations, they're not looking out for us. And don't put too much expectation on that, but let's do our direct action. Let's take care of our communities. Let's educate each other and ourselves and maintain it that way.
I want to just echo one thing Maryan said, which was that this is a worldwide issue. And I want to make it clear that the U.S. has wreaked environmental, social havoc in just about every country on this planet.
Everywhere.
And they need us to, and we've just had 4 years of a Trump administration, so we have caused even more damage. So they need us to give it our all and to fight as hard as we can to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and to change our foreign policies. So I just want to say that it's like, as residents and or citizens of this country, like that is a great responsibility and opportunity that we have. And one more resource just to point people to is watchthelinemn.org. And if you go to watchthelinemn.org, you can sign up for trainings to do scouting and monitoring along the pipeline construction route.
Yeah. And Magdalena, you're so right. And they're doing their part. They're doing their part to hold the indigenous knowledges and share that out. And then we should do our part to hold the industrialized world a little bit more to what they need to do. Another two initiatives that are in Minneapolis around environmental justice are the green zones, the south side green zones, and then the northern green zones. There are groups within urbanized spaces that are working to greening up the spaces and figuring out how do we have development while we remain as neighbors. Our neighbors remain the same, but we have better communities and, more environments, a cleaner environment, And as Ron Finley said, I want hummingbirds in my backyard. I want butterflies and all the bee populations I can get. And we deserve that. Each one of us deserves that. And I think it's worth the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you all did a really great job providing us this history and this overview and like calling us into action right now. And just a short reflection thinking about this podcast coming together to look at real estate development and think about, resistance to housing insecurity and gentrification and building a socialist city, for a lack of a better word, that these are not separate issues. It's really capitalist white supremacy, capitalist domination when corporations control our society and the short-term profit margins of corporations are the number one priority. We're going to continue to see this type of violence. And I love the calls to action that you all had, that we can look this sobering reality in the face. We learned in our interview with Nico that we posted last week that the hyper-militarized coordination that we saw late in the summer to repress protests was formed because they were planning their response to Line 3. You know what I'm saying? That those agency collaborations came together because they knew we would protest. And it brings me back to something that Ricardo Levins Morales would say, is that your enemy will show you where they're weak and where they're vulnerable by where they invest their resources for protection, right? Somebody riding a bike, their head is the thing they want to protect because they got that helmet on. So as much as we have to understand that this is like a violent opposition we're up against, they're afraid of us. They're mobilizing because they know that in our hearts and our minds and our mobilizations that we can beat them, and I believe that we will beat them, on every front. And just one last reflection is because it feels so resonant with the Upper Harbor, is the way the commissioner said, "Oh, my hands are tied. I can't do it. If I did make the right decision, it would just get reversed later." You hear that same excuse on every level of government from so many people, and it's so affirming to see you all reject that whole cloth and say that that's not true. The only thing that they can do for us in those positions is fight. You know what I'm saying? Like, so if they're not willing to do that, they need to be gone. And these types of appointments are just as important as who the candidate is that gets elected. So people are going to start thinking about, the mayoral and city council elections next year. We need to be thinking about whoever the mayor, who are they going to appoint to CPED? Who are going to appoint to MPHA? Who are these positions? Because it's bigger than one person. All right, I just want to get them reflections out. Having said that, I want to say thank you to Kaleigh Swift, Magdalena Kaluza, Maryan Abdinur for joining us today. Thank you for your work that you all have been doing with this advisory committee, and then the courage to make that public resignation and make a lot of noise. We really appreciate you joining us. Money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity.